The night before Jon Snow is sent away, Catelyn Stark makes a calculation. It is not the calculation anyone expects of her. It is not warm. It is not maternal. It is the cold, precise arithmetic of a woman who has spent years building walls inside her own house and who has finally decided that one particular wall has been built in the wrong place. She finds Ned in his solar, the candles burning low, the fire reduced to ember and ash. He is sitting with the posture of a man who has already made peace with a decision he hates. Shoulders forward, hands folded. The specific stillness of Lord Eddard Stark when he has told himself that suffering through something honorable is the same as doing something right. She has seen this posture before. She has learned over long years that it is precisely the moment when he is most wrong. She does not sit. She speaks. She tells him plainly that Jon Snow will not go to the wall. Not tomorrow. Not at 14. She says the word like a stone placed on a table. 14. And lets it rest there between them. A child. Whatever the complications of his birth, whatever the grief of his presence in her home, whatever silent fury she has carried in her chest like a coal for all these years, none of it changes the fact that sending a boy of 14 to the wall is not honor. It is disposal. And she will not have it done inside her house, under her name, with her silence giving it the shape of consent. Ned does not argue immediately. This is how she knows she has reached him. He is a man who argues against things he does not believe are wrong. When the argument dies before it forms, something underneath his certainty has already given way. He speaks of Jon's purpose, of the difficulty of his position, of the wall as a place where bastards have made names, where men of worth have risen without the accident of birth to carry them. He says all of this quietly, and with the voice of a man repeating lines he wrote for himself long ago before he believed them fully. She lets him finish. Then she says, there are other ways to give a young man purpose, ways that do not require exiling him to the edge of the world so that his presence stops being a problem for the people who made him one. He does not finish the next sentence. He does not need to. The candle between them gutters once in the draught beneath the door, and the shadow it casts across his face does something complicated to his expression. And then the decision, the one she has already made, the one she has come here simply to deliver, passes between them without further ceremony. Jon Snow will stay. In the morning, Ned goes to the boy himself. He finds him in the yard before the light has properly established itself, already moving with that particular economy Jon has always had. Nothing wasted, nothing performed, just the quiet industry of someone who learned early that stillness draws less trouble than motion. Ned tells him that his plans have changed, that he will remain at Winterfell, that there is work here, real work, useful work, in training the younger children, in maintaining the guard rotations, in being what Winterfell needs, rather than what the Night's Watch would eventually make of him. Jon stands very still when he hears this. His face does what it always does, which is very little on the surface. But something behind his eyes shifts like weight redistributing across a structure that has been waiting to collapse. He says, "And Lady Stark?" Ned says, "Speak with her yourself." Catelyn finds him in the great hall after the midday meal, when the noise has cleared and the tables have been wiped down and the hounds are sleeping in the corner with their enormous, artless contentment. She sits across from him without invitation or announcement. He does not rise, which surprises her faintly, and then does not surprise her at all. He is learning already, learning that she is not here for performance. She speaks plainly, as she does to anyone she means to deal with honestly. She tells him she will not love him as her own. She does not soften this. She says it without cruelty, the way a maester names a condition before prescribing treatment. Not to wound, but because clarity is the only honest foundation for what comes next. She will not pretend. She has never pretended. But she will not see him sent off to freeze and diminish and disappear. And she will not have anyone in this castle mistake her opposition to the wall as a sudden warmth she does not feel. He listens with his hands flat on the table. His jaw is set the way Ned's jaw sets when he is absorbing something true that costs him something to hear. He says, "I understand, my lady." She says, "See that you do." It is not a kindness. It is something more durable than kindness. It is the establishment of terms, cold, clear, survivable terms, between two people who will now have to build a shared life inside the same walls, without pretending those walls have ever been anything other than what they are. Outside in the yard, Robb Stark calls for his brother to come spar, and for just a moment, before Jon rises, his face does something almost helpless with relief. The banners come first. They always come first. The ravens preceding the king, the way thunder precedes the storm, and Winterfell in the days before Robert Baratheon's arrival becomes a castle that hardly sleeps. Kitchens run through the night. Stable hands double their shifts. Servants who have never once had occasion to polish a particular corridor's sconces suddenly find those sconces require urgent attention. It is the machinery of hospitality cranked to its highest and most anxious pitch. And inside this machinery, Jon Snow moves carefully, learning something he will spend years refining: how to be present without being conspicuous. He has spent his whole life practicing that particular art, of course. But the stakes have changed. Before, he was hiding from a general social discomfort, the ambient awkwardness of his position, the way a room could shift when someone remembered what he was. Now, there is a specific threat, vast and royal and approaching on horseback, with all the momentum of a man who has never once been denied a direct answer to a direct question. Robert Baratheon, first of his name, does not ask things the way other men ask things. He demands, and the demand is wrapped in enough warmth and genuine appetite for life that most people hand him what he wants before they've thought to question whether they intended to. Ned knows this. Ned has known this since they were boys at the Eyrie, since they fought together, since he watched Robert grieve and rage and eventually build a throne out of the wreckage of that grief. He knows precisely how his king's mind works, which is to say, he knows that Robert notices people. He notices the interesting ones the way a hunting dog notices movement. Instinctively, immediately, with an attention that narrows and sharpens before the conscious mind has even registered the target. Jon is interesting. This is the problem. This has always been the problem, though it has never before been quite so dangerous. He is in the yard when the king's party rides through the gates, not because he is meant to be seen, but because Robb is there. And where Robb is, Jon has spent the last several weeks gravitating toward naturally two young men finding the rhythm of something that might, with enough time and goodwill, become the thing it was always supposed to be. Catelyn's terms have held. They have not become warmth, but they have become something functional and honest, which in the long geography of Winterfell amounts to a kind of peace. Jon understands what he has been given and what has not been given, and he does not mistake one for the other. He has her clarity to thank for that, at least. Robert sees him before Ned can manage the moment. That is the thing about kings. They move through space as though the world is already arranged for their convenience, and so it tends to be. And so, Robert's gaze sweeps the yard with the easy authority of a man cataloging his own property and lands without quite meaning to, on the young man standing at Robb Stark's shoulder. He is on his horse still. His voice carries the way his voice always carries, designed by some combination of nature and years of use to fill whatever space it enters completely. He asks who the boy is. Ned answers without hesitation, which is itself the product of enormous internal effort compressed into the appearance of ease. He says, "Ward." He uses the word precisely, deliberately, the way a meister selects a specific herb from a specific shelf. Not the closest approximation, but the exact one. Ward. It satisfies the shape of the question without inviting its follow-up. Robert, who has wards of his own, who understands the particular ambiguity of the term and has made grateful use of that ambiguity at various points in his reign, accepts it. He nods. He looks at Jon a moment longer than the nod suggests he should, something flickering behind his eyes that might be recognition or might only be the general sharpness of a man who has survived long enough to trust his instincts, even when he cannot name what they are telling him. Then he dismounts and calls for wine, and the moment closes. But it has happened. That is the thing that matters, the thing that Ned turns over quietly in the back of his mind through all the feasting and all the conversation and all the careful performance of hospitality that follows. The moment has happened, and it has been survived, and the word ward has done its work. Robert has accepted it because he wants to accept it, because he is here for Ned, and for old friendship, and for the question he is about to ask, and because the boy in the yard, however striking, is a secondary concern beside the weight of what the king has ridden north to propose. Hand of the king. The offer arrives with the certainty of a man who has not genuinely considered refusal, and Ned sits with it the way he sits with every heavy thing, squarely, without flinching, letting the full weight of it settle before he responds. He is going to say yes. He already knows he is going to say yes, not because he wants the South or the court or the particular poison of King's Landing's politics, but because he knows Robert well enough to understand that this is not merely an invitation. It is a need dressed in the language of honor, and Ned has never been capable of refusing a genuine need from someone he loves. What has changed? And this is the quiet revolution inside the familiar shape of events, is that the question of Jon does not enter the conversation at all. There is no wall to suggest. There is no solution to arrange. Jon stays at Winterfell, and this has been decided already, settled in a solar room between two people who built their agreement on honesty rather than affection. And so it requires no renegotiation now. Robb will hold Winterfell. Jon will stand at Robb's shoulder, not as a ghost the family has learned to navigate around, but as something with defined edges and a defined place. Robb's ward, if anyone asks. Ned's ward, if anyone presses. The word does its work again, elastic and sufficient. What this means, in the ledger of power that all castles keep, whether their inhabitants acknowledge it or not, is that something has shifted between the two young men that cannot easily be shifted back. Robb is the heir, unambiguously, the future of House Stark, made flesh and blood and the dark Tully coloring of his mother's line. But Jon, standing beside him, rather than diminished below him or exiled beyond the horizon, becomes something harder to categorize and therefore harder to dismiss. He is not a rival. He is not quite a subordinate. He is a presence with weight. Jaime Lannister notices this the following morning in the training yard. In the particular way that men trained to violence notice things about other people trained to violence, Jon does not know he is being watched. This is, it will turn out, its own kind of mistake. Not because the watching is immediately threatening, but because Jaime Lannister is not a man who forgets what he has seen and what he sees in Jon's footwork, in the particular economy of his movement, in the way he angles his shoulder before a strike in a manner that is not quite the northern style and not quite anything Jaime can place his finger on, is something that unsettles him in a way he does not examine closely enough to understand. He watches. He says nothing. Across the yard, Jon parries a blow from Robb and returns it, and for just a moment, the two of them are laughing, the sound bright and uncomplicated in the cold air, and Jaime files it away in the place where he keeps things that do not yet mean anything, but that he suspects, in the way that men who have survived through instinct tend to suspect will mean something eventually. Ned watches too, from a different angle, with a different weight behind his eyes. He has said yes to Robert. He has not yet told his wife, though she will not be surprised. She is a woman who reads the shape of events before they announce themselves, and she has understood since the ravens arrived what this visit would cost them. What she does not yet know, what none of them yet know, is that the cost has been quietly redistributed. Ned goes south, Jon stays, and the version of Winterfell that exists after the king's party rides away is not the version that existed before the banners came over the hill. It is something new, something with a different center of gravity, and somewhere in the back of Ned's mind, riding alongside the grief of departure and the dread of King's Landing and all the familiar calculus of duty, is the smallest, most carefully guarded thing. The sense that perhaps, for once, he has arranged something that will hold. He does not linger on it. Men like Ned Stark do not linger on hope. But it is there, and it travels south with him in the morning when the horses are readied and the farewells are made, and Jon stands in the yard beside Robb, and Ned looks at them both for a long moment before he turns his horse toward the road. The yard empties slowly after that. Banners fold, horses disappear into the stables, and the dust of the King's Passage settles back onto the stones of Winterfell as if it had never been disturbed. Robb watches the road long after there is nothing left to watch. Jon watches Robb. This is already the shape of things to come. Robb is 15 and broad in the shoulder, and carries his father's name like a standard he has not yet earned the right to plant. He knows this, the way young men with good fathers always know it, that awareness sitting somewhere beneath confidence, like cold water under ice. What Jon provides, almost without intending to, is ballast. He does not defer to Robb in the way that servants defer or bannermen defer. He defers the way a second mind defers to a first, when it trusts that first mind to arrive at the right answer, but reserves the right to redirect it when it does not. Robb feels the difference. It steadies him in ways he could not have articulated to anyone, least of all himself. They train together every morning before the light has fully settled over Winterfell's walls. Sir Roderick watches, and his expression over those first weeks changes in small but legible increments. The slight narrowing of the eyes that is not disapproval, but recalibration. The way he begins to address them together, rather than separately, when discussing formations and footwork, and the management of a blade under fatigue. He has trained boys before. He has trained boys who became lords, and boys who became soldiers, and boys who became cautionary tales. These two are something he does not have a simple category for, and the absence of that category interests him. Jon fights the way cold water moves, finding the angle of least resistance, adaptive, never forcing when redirection costs less. Robb fights the way Robb does everything, with conviction so total, it becomes its own liability. The correction flows both ways across the weeks. Robb learning to look before he commits. Jon learning that there are moments when commitment itself is the tactical move, that hesitation has its own cost. By the time the first frost of the turning season rimes the training yard stones, they are not two fighters practicing beside each other. They are a single system with two components, and the northern lords who come to Winterfell on business begin to take note of them the way men of the north take note of things, quietly without announcement, filing the observation somewhere useful. Catelyn's letters arrive from King's Landing in a rhythm that Robb learns to anticipate. They come folded tight and sealed with a care that suggests she has read them twice before sending, removed whatever she first wrote, and replaced it with something more considered. The language is careful throughout, the language of a woman managing multiple audiences simultaneously. She writes to her son, and she writes knowing that sons become lords, and she writes with one eye always on the longer game. Jon is mentioned first with formality, then with something adjacent to approval, and then in a letter that arrives in the deep cold of early winter with a sentence that contains no qualifications at all. He writes it, steadies Robb. Robb reads it aloud once, looks at Jon across the solar table, and says nothing further. Jon says nothing either. He does not need to. What Catelyn does not write, but which lives between every line she sends north, is the quiet revision she is conducting within herself. She had not wanted Jon there. That position had seemed, from every angle she examined it, correct. And now she finds herself in the uncomfortable position of someone whose correct reasoning has produced an outcome they did not expect, not because the logic failed, but because the situation contained a variable she had not weighted properly. Jon Snow steadies her son. Jon Snow is turning an impulsive, brilliant, dangerously emotional young man into something that might, under the right conditions, become a leader that the North can follow without flinching. She has not told Ned this. The admission costs something she is not yet ready to pay in full, but she holds it privately, the way you hold something that changes the shape of a room even when you set it down. Bran falls in late autumn, the same as he always would have, the same as he was always going to. Because some things in this altered version of the world proceed along the same grooves carved by fate or character or gravity, and Bran's climbing was never something that could have been redirected by the presence of one more person at Winterfell. The fall happens. The days of stillness happen. Catelyn takes her post beside his bed, and the world contracts to the size of a single room. And Robb moves through the castle with a grief that has not yet decided what shape it intends to take. Jon is present the night the assassin comes. He is there because he has been sleeping in the corridor outside Bran's room, quietly, without instruction, the way a man with military instincts positions himself without needing to explain the reasoning. The assassin enters. The fire has burned low. Catelyn is awake, and she is fast, but it is Jon's blade that finds the man first. And when the body is still, and the candles are relit, and the shock is doing what shock does, Jon crouches beside the dead man and finds it. The dagger, slim and dark, a blade that catches the low light in a way that ordinary steel does not. He turns it once in his hand. Catelyn is already watching him. She already knows what Valyrian steel means in a room like this, in a night like this, pressed into the hand of an assassin sent for a sleeping child. Her eyes move from the blade to Jon's face, and something hardens there, not against him, but because of what the blade implies, what it points toward, what it means about the forces that have followed her husband south into the capital and arranged themselves around him in ways she had not yet been able to confirm. Jon sets the dagger down on the table beside Bran's bed and steps back. He does not speak. He does not need to. Catelyn reaches for the dagger, and her hand is very steady, and her mind is already moving. Her mind is already moving, and it moves north, not south, where the letter will eventually arrive, not toward the throne room or the dungeons or the dim corridors where Littlefinger's men walk with soft shoes and attentive ears. North, toward Ned, toward the shape of what her husband walked into when he rode to King's Landing and accepted the weight of a dead man's office. The dagger in her hand is cold in the way Valyrian steel is always cold, carrying its own temperature independent of the room, and she understands in the marrow of that coldness that what happened in this chamber tonight was not an accident of opportunity. It was a commission. Someone spent something to have this done, and the blade they chose was not chosen carelessly. This is what she knows, and this is what she carries. Far to the south, in the city that never truly sleeps, Ned Stark sits in the small hours with a candle burned nearly to its base, and a certainty settling over him like frost over a field, slow even, covering everything. He has been in King's Landing long enough now to feel the particular quality of its dangers. The court operates on a logic of surfaces. Every smile is a calculation. Every courtesy conceals a ledger. He has watched Cersei Lannister across a dozen suppers and council tables, and he has watched her with the specific attention of a man who already suspects the architecture of a lie and is looking only for the corner where it meets the floor. He finds it piece by piece. He finds it in the way her eldest son sits the throne in miniature, performing a king's authority with none of a king's weight behind the eyes. He finds it in the genealogies, in the old books, in the gold on gold on gold of every Lannister child born into a dynasty that should, by all hereditary mathematics, have shown some trace of Baratheon darkness by now. He does not yet have proof that will hold before the full council. He is close. He knows he is close. And knowing he is close is what frightens him, because frightened men in this city make choices they cannot unmake, and Ned Stark has never been a man who frightens easily. The fact that he frightens now is its own form of information. But there is a second fear, quieter, more structural, and it lives in a separate chamber of his chest entirely. Jon is at Winterfell. This is the thought that returns to him in the intervals between all other thoughts. Jon is at Winterfell. Jon is not on the wall, not nameless, not folded away into the gray anonymity of the Night's Watch, where the world ends and stories stop mattering. Jon is in the castle. Jon is in the yard where ravens arrive and depart. Jon is visible, present, breathing in the same halls where every servant and steward and stable hand can observe him, can note the shape of his face, can remark, if they were ever given reason to remark, on how little he resembles the man who claims him and how much he resembles something else entirely. Ned had made a choice 17 years ago in a tower filled with death and the sound of his sister's voice fading. He had made a promise. He had carried that promise so long and so silently that it had become part of his weight, indistinguishable from his own bones. The promise was manageable when Jon was bound for the wall. Remote, removed, a secret stored far from the places where secrets attract attention. It is not manageable now. He sits with this understanding and does not share it with anyone because there is no one to share it with. Littlefinger is a man who trades in exactly this kind of knowledge. Varys knows things before they are spoken aloud, and Ned has not yet determined what Varys does with what he knows. The members of his household are loyal, but loyalty is not the same as being beyond reach, and King's Landing has long arms. So Ned sits with it alone, which is the only safe way to sit with it. He writes the letter to Luwin in the language they have developed over years of correspondence, layered, careful, innocent, seeming to any eye but Luwin's. The surface of the letter discusses castle matters, the rotation of certain duties, the importance of keeping the younger household members engaged in practical work beyond the walls as the seasons prepare to turn. Anyone reading it finds nothing. Luwin, who has served Winterfell for decades and understands the architecture of what he is not told, reads it exactly as it is intended to be read. Keep Jon away from the ravens. Keep Jon away from anything that comes south. He seals it himself. He chooses the raven himself, rather than delegating to the rookery keeper, inventing a reason that satisfies without explaining. The raven is dispatched before the city wakes. In Winterfell, 2 days hence, Maester Luwin will unroll the parchment in his tower and read it twice. He will stand for a long moment at the window that faces the yard, where Jon is already sparring with 2 of the younger guards in the early gray light, moving with that particular fluid economy that Luwin has always privately observed and never commented upon. Then Luwin will begin drafting new patrol assignments. The northern ridgeline, the forest roads, the long cold stretches of ground where ravens do not follow, and messages from the capital arrive, if they arrive at all, days after their sending. Jon will not question it. Duty is duty, and the north is wide. But Ned's letter has not yet arrived when a different message moves through the castle. Not by raven, not by parchment, but carried in Catelyn's own grip, in the hard lines of her face as she summons Maester Luwin at dawn, and places a Valyrian dagger on his work table without a word of preamble. Luwin looks at the blade. He looks at Catelyn. He looks at the blade again. "My lady?" he begins, and she cuts him off. "I need to know," she says. "Who could have sent this? Not the man who carried it, the man who sent it." Her voice is even in the way that voices are, even when they are held even by force. And I need to know what my husband may have already begun to discover about the same question, and why he has not yet written to tell me. Luwin is quiet for a moment, that a not quite hesitation. "There are things," he says carefully, "that Lord Stark may be carrying alone by design. Catelyn's eyes do not move from his face. Then the design, she says, may need to change. The raven arrives 3 days later, not from Ned, from King's Landing, and from a hand that is not his, and the words it carries land in Winterfell like a stone dropped into still water, the ripples moving outward before anyone has fully understood the weight of what fell. Ned Stark has been arrested, charged with treason, held in the dungeons of the Red Keep by order of the Boy King and the hands that move the Boy King. The words are brief. They are sufficient. Catelyn reads them once, folds the parchment with the careful precision of a woman who will not permit herself to shake, and then calls for Robb. What arrives in the great hall of Winterfell that morning is not quite what anyone expected. Robb comes, yes, 15 years old and already carrying something in his jaw that belongs to a much older face, something set and decided and very northern. But Jon comes with him, walks through the door at the same moment, shoulder level, neither one ahead of the other by so much as a step. Catelyn sees it. Every member of the household who is gathered in that hall sees it. The two of them standing there in the gray morning light, both with Stark eyes, both with the same quality of stillness that men develop when they have been training for war and have begun to understand that the training was not theoretical. She does not ask Jon to step back. That itself is a decision, and every person in the room understands that it is. The banners go out within the hour. Robb's name on the summons, the direwolf seal pressed into dark wax, ravens carrying the call to every house that owes the Starks their sword. The Mormonts, the Karstarks, the Umbers, the Reeds, the Tallhearts, and the Hornwoods, and the smaller houses scattered through the long cold distances of the north, all of them receiving the same message. The Warden of the North is taken, and the North will answer. What they ride toward when they come is not what any of them anticipated. They expected Robb. They receive Robb and Jon both, standing together in the yard as the lords come in through the gates. And there is a moment with each arrival, a pause, a recalibration, before the measuring eyes settle into something like approval. Mage Mormont, who has known Jon Snow since he was small enough to be carried, looks at him for a long moment, and then looks at Robb and says, "Good." Nothing more elaborate than that. Rickard Karstark takes slightly longer to arrive at the same conclusion, but he arrives there. The North is pragmatic about certain things. It has always been pragmatic about strength, and what stands before them in that yard has the clear, unmistakable quality of strength, doubled. Theon Greyjoy watches all of this from the edges. He watches Robb defer to Jon on a question of positioning, a minor thing, a tactical detail about where to quarter the Karstark horses. And then he watches Jon answer with the quiet, unhurried certainty of someone who has been thinking about logistics since before the question was asked. Theon's jaw tightens. He does not say anything. He does not need to say anything yet, because the thing growing inside him is not yet large enough to require words. It is still small and compressed, still in the stage where it presents to the world as mere watchfulness. But it is not watchfulness. It is the early form of something considerably more dangerous, and it needs only time and continued grievance to become what it is trying to become. He had believed, in the way that men believe things they have never formally stated even to themselves, that he occupied a particular place in Robb's regard. Closest companion, most trusted, the one whose counsel was sought first. That place is not gone precisely. Robb still reaches for him, still values what he offers. But it is different now. The way a room is different when a second lamp is lit. The shadows do not disappear. They simply shift, and the man standing in those shifted shadows does not always recognize that the light has not left him. He sees only that something new has arrived, and he names it as a subtraction. Catelyn leaves on the 6th day. The decision to ride south, to treat with Renly and Stannis, to feel out what shape the allegiances of the realm are taking, to look for any lever she might use to bring her husband home, is not made lightly, and it is not made quickly. And the last thing she does before she goes is the thing that no one in Winterfell will stop discussing for weeks afterward. She places Jon Snow in command of the garrison, not in command beside Robb, who is riding with the banners, in command of Winterfell itself, alongside Bran, who is still learning to live in the body the fall has left him. She stands in the yard with the household assembled and says it plainly, without ceremony or excessive explanation, in the tone of a woman announcing a practical arrangement. Jon will hold the castle. Maester Luwin will counsel. The guard will answer to Jon until she or Robb returns. She does not look at Jon when she says it. She looks at the household. She is speaking to them, not to him, telling them, not asking them. And the firmness of it leaves no architecture for objection. Then she does look at him, just for a moment. Her expression gives nothing away, which is, in its own manner, the most she has ever given. Jon holds her gaze steadily. He does not say thank you. He understands, perhaps, that this is not a gift. It is a responsibility handed over by someone who has calculated very carefully that he is the correct person to bear it, and that the calculation cost her something to make. She rides out before the sun reaches its height, and the gates close behind her, and Jon stands on the rampart above, watching the road south until the riders are too small to see. And then he turns back to look at the castle that is, for this moment, his to hold. Below him in the yard, Theon is watching him, and the thing inside Theon that has not yet found its words is beginning, very quietly, to find them. The whispering wood does not announce itself. It simply closes around an army the way water closes around a stone, quietly, completely, without ceremony. The trees there are old, and the darkness between them is older still, and it is into that darkness that Robb Stark rides with the weight of the North behind him and the cold calculation of someone who has stopped being a boy without quite deciding to become a man. He has a plan. More than that, he has a trap. And the Lannisters, confident, road-weary, certain of the mathematics of their own superiority, walk directly into it. Jon's cavalry takes the eastern approach. This is not an accident. It is not a concession or a kindness or a younger brother given a manageable corner of the battle to keep him occupied. It is strategy, clean and deliberate, because Robb looks at a map the way their father taught them both to look at maps, not as pictures of land, but as pictures of consequence. And the eastern approach is where the trap needs its teeth. Jon rides into that darkness with 200 mounted men at his back, and the specific focused silence of someone who has been waiting, without knowing it, his entire life to be useful in exactly this way. The battle itself is brief in the manner that prepared traps are always brief. Jaime Lannister is cavalry and pride, and the absolute unshakable certainty that he is the finest soldier in any field he stands upon. And all of that is true, and none of it is sufficient against men who know the ground. The Kingslayer fights magnificently, He wounds 3 northern lords and kills one before the horses close around him, and the numbers become a language even Jaime cannot argue with. He yields. He does not do it gracefully. He is not the kind of man who does anything gracefully that costs him something, but he yields, and the word moves through the northern camp like fire through dry grass. Jaime Lannister is taken. Jaime Lannister is in chains. Jon receives his recognition quietly, which is the only way he knows how to receive anything. Lorcar Stark says it plainly in front of men who matter that the eastern flank held because of the Snowboy's reading of the ground, and several heads nod in the firelight, and Robb watches his brother's face with something that is not quite pride and not quite relief, but lives in the space between them. Jon does not stand straighter. He does not perform anything. He absorbs it the way cold ground absorbs rain, completely, without display. What no recognition can prepare him for is what comes 3 days later. He learns it from a man who was on watch and should not have been in the position to see what he saw, and from a second man who confirms it, and from the particular quality of silence that moves through the lower camp the way certain silences do. Not empty, but full, pressed tight with something enormous trying not to be spoken. Jaime Lannister is gone. Lady Catelyn is gone with him. The chains are in the dirt, and Brienne of Tarth, her sworn sword, is nowhere among the camp. Jon sits with this knowledge for the length of time it takes to understand it fully, which is not long. He understands grief. He understands what it means to want your children back so desperately that the wanting becomes its own kind of logic, airtight and terrible, and completely disconnected from consequence. He does not judge the impulse. He judges with great care only what comes next. Because what comes next is Robb, and what Robb cannot be allowed to do is hear this from his lords. He finds his brother before the lords do. This requires moving quickly through a camp that is beginning to stir with the news, and it requires speaking first and plainly, and it requires absorbing the full force of Robb's fury at close range without stepping back from it. Robb's face when he understands is not grief and not anger, but something that briefly has no name, a compound fracture of feeling. Too many things breaking at once. He paces. He does not speak for a long time. When he does, what comes out is not what Jon expected, which is the thing about Robb that has always made him worth following. He does not send Catelyn away. He confines her to camp. It is a judgment that is also a mercy, and Jon recognizes the shape of it. Their father's thinking, wearing Robb's face. That night Jon sits with her outside her tent, and neither of them speaks for a long time. The fire between them is low, and the camp around them is quieter than camps usually are, and Catelyn Stark stares into the middle distance with the particular stillness of someone who has done the thing they knew was wrong and cannot make themselves regret it. Jon does not offer her absolution. He does not have it to give, and she would not take it from him anyway. What he offers is simply his presence. The quiet company of someone who has never fully belonged to this family, and therefore knows, better than anyone, the precise weight of what it costs to be bound to it. She looks at him finally, not the way she looked at him at Winterfell, not with the old wariness that had a decade of habit behind it. She looks at him the way one person looks at another in the dark when all the architecture of ordinary distance has been briefly, quietly dismantled. She says his name, not Jon, not the Snowboy, his name. And then she looks back at the fire, and neither of them speaks again. But something between them has been changed in a way that cannot be unchanged, and in the morning, Robb calls his commanders together because there is news from the south. News about his father, news about King's Landing, and the look on the messenger's face makes the cold come back into everything all at once. The Raven arrives at midday, when the column is still 3 days from where it needs to be. Jon reads the message once and then reads it again, and the second reading does not change what the first has already settled inside him. Maester Luwin's hand is careful, deliberate, the letters formed with a precision that speaks to a man writing under duress, who refuses to let the duress show. Winterfell has been taken. The Ironborn came in the night. Theon Greyjoy. And here Jon pauses because he knows that name, has eaten at the same table as that name, has sparred with that name in the yard under the same gray Winterfell sky. Theon Greyjoy holds the gates. The Maester does not know where the boys are. He does not say they are dead. He does not need to say it for the fear to be legible between every carefully formed letter. Jon does not ride back to Robb's tent to ask permission. This is the first time in his life that he simply does not do that, and it is a clean feeling, cleaner than he expects. Not reckless, not hot with anger, but precise and cold and entirely certain. He pulls 300 riders from the column, men who know northern roads, men whose horses have not yet been ground down by the southern marching pace, and he turns them north before the sun has moved another hand's width across the sky. He sends a rider to Robb. Not a request, a statement of fact. He is gone. He will send word. They ride hard for 2 days, and then harder still on the third, and the whole march north has the quality of a man solving a problem rather than answering an outrage. Jon thinks about Winterfell's walls the way a mason thinks about them, where they are thick, where they are merely thick enough, where a determined force of 300 could break through, and where that same force would be broken instead. He calculates. He rides. He does not sleep in any meaningful way, because the problem will not let him, and Ghost runs alongside the column through the gray hours before dawn in a silence that feels like agreement. He arrives too late to prevent what has already happened. The Ironborn banner hangs from Winterfell's gate, and that sight costs him something, costs him a breath, costs him a moment of stillness on his horse at the tree line, while the thing arranges itself into meaning inside him. But the castle still stands. The walls are whole. There is no smoke. Luwin has managed something in the intervening hours, has spoken carefully to men who might otherwise have put torches to what they could not hold, and that careful management has purchased exactly the margin that Jon now uses. He encircles the castle before midday, not an assault. He does not have the numbers for an assault without destroying everything an assault is supposed to save. A siege, a closing of the ring. He sets his riders at every road and every track, positions them so that nothing moves in or out without his knowledge, and then he waits with the particular patience of someone who has understood from the very beginning that patience is the most powerful thing available to him. Theon's men can hold the walls. They cannot fill their own bellies from those walls indefinitely. The mathematics of it are not complicated. Inside Winterfell, Theon feels the encirclement like a man feeling the first symptoms of an illness he cannot name, but already knows is serious. He goes to the walls and looks at the riders, and the riders look back without hostility, without urgency, without any of the performing fire that would give him something to measure himself against. They simply wait. Jon Snow waits. And in that waiting, there is a precision that Theon recognizes as more dangerous than any charge. 6 days into the siege, when the stores have begun to say what they will eventually say too loudly to ignore, and when no Ironborn fleet has appeared on any horizon, because no Ironborn fleet was ever truly coming. Not insufficient numbers, not in time, not for Theon Greyjoy's particular gamble on his own importance. The gates of Winterfell open. Theon walks out himself. He does not send a representative. Whatever he is, and he is many things in this moment, foolish, cornered, frightened beneath a bravado he has not yet fully surrendered. He walks out on his own legs and faces Jon Snow across the cold ground between the gate and the tree line, and the two of them look at each other the way two people look at each other when they share enough history to make the present complicated. Jon takes him prisoner. Not the sword stroke that Theon half expects, and perhaps half wants, because a sword stroke would be a kind of resolution. Prisoner, alive, to be dealt with by laws and by lords, and by whatever accounting the world has left to make of what was taken and what was returned. Bran and Rickon are found in the crypts beneath the castle, cold and hungry and present, alive in the absolute, uncomplicated sense of the word. Rickon runs. Bran cannot run, but his face, when he sees Jon, carry the particular relief of someone who had started to believe in the worst, and has now been pulled back from that belief by simple evidence. Jon holds Rickon against him in the courtyard and looks up at Winterfell's towers and says nothing, because nothing is adequate and nothing is enough. Luwin finds him an hour later with a second raven, just arrived, its message written in a different hand entirely. A southern hand, a King's Landing hand. And the words on it make Jon's face go very still in a way that Luwin will remember for a long time. The raven's message travels north, and the news it carries is surgical in its precision. Robb Stark is at the Twins. The wedding has not yet happened. There is still time, and time in war is the rarest currency of all, more precious than gold, more precious than men, because gold can be mined and men can be recruited, but time, once spent, does not return to the hand that spent it. Jon reads the message twice. Then he folds it and holds it in his fist and stands very still in Winterfell's great hall while the fire burns low and Bran sleeps somewhere above him, and Rickon has finally, exhausted by relief, stopped moving. The message is not from Robb. It is from someone in Robb's camp who understood that certain information needed to travel north urgently. And the information is this: Robb Stark has married someone else, a woman named Talisa, a woman from Volantis with healer's hands and no political value whatsoever to a king fighting for his kingdom's survival. And the Freys are aware of it, and the Freys are furious, and the Freys are the only crossing on the Green Fork that Robb's army needs to use. What if a single decision, made in a moment of genuine human feeling, becomes the pivot point on which everything turns? What if love, in wartime, is not a comfort, but a weapon that your enemies will use against you? What if Robb Stark, who is brave and fierce and genuinely gifted in the field, has committed the one error that battlefield courage cannot undo? Jon does not finish reading what Luwin translates from the second message before he is already thinking 3 moves ahead. He sends his own raven south before dawn. The message is short. He writes it himself, in his own hand, because this is not a letter that should pass through anyone else. It says, honor the Freys. Whatever it costs, pay it. The North cannot afford what it cannot afford. He does not explain further. Robb will understand, or he will not. But Jon knows his brother, knows the particular architecture of his pride, knows that Robb responds to directness the way some men respond to command, not with resentment, but with recognition, as if what they needed was someone willing to say the true thing plainly instead of dressing it in diplomacy's softer clothes. The letter arrives at the twins 3 days before the wedding is scheduled to proceed. Robb reads it in his tent on the eastern bank with Catelyn beside him, and for a long moment, the only sound is the river and the wind off the water. Then Robb sets the letter down on the camp table and says nothing for a long time. Catelyn says, "He is right." Robb says, "I know." He does not say anything else. He does not need to. What happens at the twins is not a triumph. It is something harder than a triumph. It is a negotiated survival, a peace purchased at the cost of certain territorial claims that Robb yields to House Frey, with a face that reveals nothing and hands that remain perfectly steady throughout the signing. Walder Frey watches him with those small wet eyes that miss nothing and calculate everything, and Robb meets that gaze without flinching, because flinching would cost more than the land already yielded. The wedding proceeds. It is not joyful. It is not meant to be joyful. It is a ceremony between two families who trust each other approximately as far as either could throw the twins into the river, and everyone in the hall understands this, and the understanding sits over the feast like weather. But no one dies. That is the detail that matters. No one dies. Robb Stark rides north from the twins with his army intact, with his alliance holding, a lesser man for the compromises made, and a living man for the same reason. And in the long accounting of war, those two things are not as different as pride would prefer them to be. Farther east, in a different kind of hall, Tywin Lannister receives a report. The report informs him that the Frey alliance has been renewed, that the wedding occurred without incident, that Robb Stark left the twins with his bannermen around him and his head still attached to his body. Tywin reads this report with the stillness of someone who has been playing a very long game and has just watched one of his pieces fail to advance. He does not rage. Tywin Lannister does not rage. He recalculates. He turns his attention to Rose Bolton. Bolton has been useful. Bolton has always been useful in the particular way that cold men are useful. Precisely, and without mess, and without the complications that sentiment introduces. The plan was elegant. The Freys provide the location and the occasion. Bolton provides the betrayal from within, and Winterfell becomes a prize waiting to be claimed. But now comes the report that complicates everything. Winterfell is not waiting to be claimed. Winterfell has already been claimed, not by Rose Bolton's forces, and not by Theon Greyjoy's men, but by Jon Snow, who is neither fish nor wolf in the clean categorical sense that makes political accounting straightforward. Bolton reads his own letter by candlelight in his tent, and his expression does not change. His expression rarely changes. But his hand, just briefly, tightens around the letter before he sets it down, and he sits for a long time in the quiet, thinking about a boy he underestimated, and a castle he cannot easily take, and the particular problem of an enemy who holds the ground you needed. The Great Hall of Winterfell holds its cold the way stone always does, not as a failure of warmth, but as a deliberate choice, a structural honesty. The hearth fires burn at either end, And still the cold remains, present in the corners, present in the high rafters where the smoke curls and thins and disappears into darkness. It is the kind of cold that does not apologize. Ned Stark's bones rest in a simple casket on the long table, returned at last to the north that made him, and the hall is otherwise empty except for these two, the woman who was his wife and the boy who was never quite his son. Catelyn Stark has not slept. This is visible in the set of her mouth, in the stillness of her hands folded in her lap, in the quality of her gaze, which is not unfocused, but rather focused on something that is not in the room. She has been sitting here since before the candles burned low. She has been sitting here because there is nowhere else, and because the question she has carried for years has finally reached the point where carrying it any further would cost more than asking it. Jon stands near the far wall. He has been standing there long enough that standing has stopped feeling like a posture and become simply a fact. He watched Robb weep over the casket an hour ago. He watched Bran stand very still and say nothing, which was somehow worse. He watched them leave one by one until only Catelyn remained. And then he remained too, because leaving felt like a form of cowardice he could not afford. She speaks first. She does not ask it gently. There's no cruelty in it either. She asks it the way a woman asks a question she has already answered 100 times in private, and needs now only to have confirmed. With a directness that strips away every softening courtesy, every diplomatic hedge, she asks him who he is, not the name. She knows the name. She asks him what runs in his blood, because she has watched him for 15 years, and there is something in him she cannot account for, something that never matched the explanation she was given, something that sat wrong in the story the way a stone sits wrong in a wall. Not obviously, not catastrophically, but wrong enough that the eye keeps returning to it. Jon does not answer immediately. He found the letter 3 days ago. He found it in the crypts, behind the stone marker of Lyanna's tomb, exactly where Maester Luwin told him Ned had left it with instructions. Instructions that Luwin had carried in silence for years, like a man carrying a stone he could not put down. The letter was sealed with Ned's personal mark. It was not long. Ned was never a man who used more words than the thing required, and the thing required very few. What it required was honesty, and Ned gave it, stripped of decoration, stripped of everything except the truth, which was this. Lyanna asked him to protect her son. Lyanna made him promise. And Ned Stark, who understood that a promise made to the dying was the most binding promise of all, kept it for the rest of his life, and it killed him, not directly, not by the blade, but by the isolation it required, the distance it placed between him and every person he loved, because the truth was too dangerous to share and too heavy to put down. Jon tells her this now. He tells her quietly, in that cold stone hall, with his father's bones between them. He is Lyanna's son. He believes, he cannot be certain, but he believes because the letter names no father directly yet points toward only one possible answer, that Rhaegar Targaryen was his father. He says the name carefully, as if testing whether the hall will hold it. The hall holds it. The fire at the far end does not change. The cold does not change. Catelyn's face does not change either, not immediately. What follows is not rage. Rage would have been easier. Rage would have had edges, would have given Jon something to push against, something to answer. What follows instead is silence. a long broken silence that has a texture to it, that seems to shift as it continues, moving through stages the way grief moves, not cleanly, but in lurches, in reversals, in moments where it seems to ease and then deepens again. She looks at the casket. She looks at it for a long time. When she speaks, her voice is steady in the way that voices are steady when steadiness is all that remains. Not calm, not composed, but simply beyond the point where breaking serves any purpose. She says she understands now why he could never tell her. She says this not as an accusation and not as forgiveness, because forgiveness implies a verdict, and she has not reached one. She says it as a recognition, the particular recognition of a woman who has spent years constructing a story that never quite held together, watching now as the true shape of it finally emerges, and finding that the true shape is sadder than the story she built. He carried it alone. He carried it because sharing it would have endangered the boy, and because Ned Stark did not know how to give half a secret, how to trust one person and not another. And so he trusted no one, and the weight of that became the space between them, the distance she always felt and never understood. She weeps, not dramatically, not loudly. It comes the way deep cold comes, quietly, without announcement, without drama, simply there. She weeps not for herself, and not for the years of bitterness, and not for the things she made Jon into in her own heart, the wound she dressed as a person. She weeps for Ned, for a man who loved his sister enough to ruin his own marriage, protecting her child, for a man who chose the right thing and paid for it in loneliness every day of his life, and never once asked to be relieved of it. Jon does not know what to do with this. He has imagined this conversation in 100 forms across years of turning the question over in the dark. He imagined anger. He imagined cold dismissal. He did not imagine this. A woman weeping quietly over his father's bones, and the weeping being not about him at all, but about the man they both lost. He sits down beside her. He does not speak. He does not leave. The fire burns lower. Outside the hall, Winterfell continues its slow return to itself. Guards on the walls, Robb's men settling into quarters. The business of a reclaimed castle moving forward with that particular momentum that crises generate, action filling every space because stillness is too close to grief. But in here, the stillness holds, and neither of them moves to break it. And the bones of Eddard Stark rest between them like a question that has finally, after everything, been answered. And the answer is sadder and stranger and more costly than either of them expected. And it changes nothing about what already happened, and it changes everything about what comes next. Because Catelyn Stark is not a woman who receives information and does nothing with it. Even now, even in this, part of her mind is already moving, turning the new shape of things over carefully, examining its edges, calculating what it means for Robb's claim, what it means for the war, what it means that the boy sitting beside her in the firelight has a better claim to the Iron Throne than any living person in Westeros, and has no idea yet what to do with that. And the men to the south who fear exactly this possibility are already moving their pieces into position. She does not say any of this yet. She lets the silence hold a little longer. She lets herself weep for Ned a little longer. But the mind does not stop, even in grief. The mind keeps going. The dragons are seen first at dawn, 3 shadows crossing the face of the rising sun over Blackwater Bay. And every man and woman who looks up at that sky understands in the wordless place below thought that the world they knew ended sometime in the night, and they simply had not been told yet. The reports reached the northern encampments before midday. They reach Robb Stark before the ravens carrying them have fully settled on their perches, because men on horseback ride faster than birds when the news is extraordinary enough, and this news is extraordinary enough to break every habit of patience in every rider who carries it. 3 dragons, a fleet of iron-prowed ships, the Targaryen banner flying over Dragonstone for the first time in nearly 2 decades. The Queen has come home. Robb reads the reports once, folds them carefully, reads them again. Then he summons Jon. There's no ceremony to it, no formal council in the Great Hall. Not yet. Not for this first conversation. This one happens in the small room off the war chamber, where maps are stored and decisions are made before decisions are announced. The 2 of them stand on opposite sides of a table covered in parchment, and neither speaks immediately because neither has to. The shape of the problem is already visible to both of them. Daenerys Targaryen has landed with dragons and ships, and the most credible claim to the Iron Throne that anyone has pressed in living memory. And somewhere inside Robb's camp, bearing his brother's face, but perhaps not his father's blood, there sits a second claimant, older in years, quieter in ambition, entirely unprepared for what his existence now means. Jon speaks first. He says that it cannot come out. Not now, not while the North is holding together on the strength of Robb's name. He says it plainly, the way he has always addressed hard things without softening or ceremony. And Robb watches him and feels something complicated move behind his eyes. Gratitude, maybe, and something that is not quite guilt, but lives in the same territory. Because Jon is right. The revelation of Jon's parentage, if it spreads through the Lords of the North, before anyone is prepared to manage what comes after, will not strengthen their position. It will fracture it. Some lords will pivot toward the claim immediately, seeing opportunity. Others will recoil, seeing threat. The North's unity, which has been forged through grief and necessity, and the particular force of Robb Stark's will, is not yet tempered enough to survive that kind of fracture. Not with winter pressing down from the north, not with what has been arriving in the ravens from the wall, because the reports from the wall can no longer be explained away. They have been arriving for months, strange and incremental at first, the kind of accounts that commanders dismiss as the exhaustion and fear of men stationed at the edge of the world. But they have grown too specific, too consistent, too costly in their details to be anything other than what they claim to be: dead men walking, creatures of cold and silence that kill without reason and raise what they kill. The Night's Watch, already undermanned and aging, sending word after word into a silence they cannot afford to mistake for safety. Robb has not known what to do with this information, and so he has done what commanders do when they are not ready to act. He has cataloged it, kept it close, allowed it to shape his thinking without yet shaping his strategy. But it is always there, behind every calculation about the South, behind every conversation about thrones and marriages and alliances. The real war is not here. The real war is coming from somewhere that no dragon fire has ever touched, and no one knows that yet. And someone has to tell Daenerys Targaryen, before she turns her dragons toward targets that do not matter. Jon says he will go. He says it quietly, with the particular steadiness of someone who has already made a decision and is only now finding the words for it. He will ride to Dragonstone as an envoy of the North, he says, to negotiate terms, to establish contact, to make clear that the North has no quarrel with her if she has none with them, and to warn her, to put before her, plainly and without flinching, what is coming from beyond the wall and why it must be answered before anything else. He does not mention his own blood. He does not say that she might be his aunt, or that her father was his grandfather, or that the Targaryen line, if it lives anywhere legitimate, may have split in a direction no one in this room is quite prepared to name aloud. He does not need to say it. Robb hears it in the silence around every other word. The formal council happens the following morning. The lords are assembled. The great and the lesser, the cautious and the bold, the ones whose loyalty has never wavered, and the ones who have needed reasons. Robb speaks first, outlining the situation with the clarity of a man who slept very little, but thought with great precision in the dark hours before dawn. And then Catelyn stands. She does not speak for long. She has never needed length to carry weight. She says that Jon Snow has served this family and this kingdom with everything he has, and that she trusts him to carry the Northward south with the same faithfulness he has shown in every other hour of trial. She says the North trusts him. She says it looking not at Jon, but at the assembled lords. And they look back at her, at this woman who has earned every line of grief on her face, and whose judgment has proven itself through seasons of war. And one by one, without anyone formally declaring it, the room believes her. Jon watches her from across the chamber, and something in his face shifts in a way that has no name in any language he knows. And Catelyn meets his eyes for only a moment before looking away, because some things are still being built between them and not yet ready to be examined in the open air. The preparations for his departure begin before the council has fully dispersed. He will ride with a small party, small enough to move quickly, large enough to be taken seriously. They are choosing horses already, checking supplies, debating which roads are fastest. And in a chest in Jon's quarters, sealed and unread by anyone but the two people in the north who know what it contains, sits a letter that Robb wrote in the small hours of the night before. Addressed to no one, kept only in case it becomes necessary, setting down in plain language what Jon's blood may mean, and asking in so many words that the question be weighed with mercy rather than fear. It is not a letter Jon knows about yet. The sea approaches Dragonstone before the island does. It is in the air first, salt and sulfur and something older, something that has no clean word for it, a mineral heaviness that settles at the back of the throat and stays there. The cliffs rise out of the water like the remains of something that did not survive whatever made them, and the castle above is not so much built as erupted, its towers and battlements shaped from cooled stone that still seems to be in the process of becoming. Jon stands at the prow of the small vessel as it cuts toward the harbor and says nothing, because there is nothing useful to say. He has ridden to the edge of the known world and looked at what lives beyond it. A castle carved from volcanic rock should not unsettle him. It does not unsettle him, but he feels its weight, the way certain places carry the accumulated intention of everyone who has ever stood inside them and wanted something enormous. She is waiting in the throne room. That is how it is arranged. That is how she prefers it. And he understands why. Because the room is designed to make the approaching party smaller and the seated figure larger, and a queen who has crossed an ocean to reclaim a birthright has earned the right to use the tools of the room she was born in. Daenerys Targaryen sits at the far end of the hall and watches him walk toward her, and Jon walks the full length of the room without looking away from her face, not because he is performing courage, but because he is genuinely trying to read her. She is doing the same to him. Two people assessing each other with everything they have in a room designed to turn conversation into ceremony, and neither of them particularly inclined to let it. He does not kneel. There had been debate about this in the days before his departure, in the quiet exchanges between Davos and himself on the ship. He had listened to all of it and made his decision in the way he makes most decisions, not through calculation exactly, but through a kind of internal settling, like sediment finding the bottom of still water. He bends his head, a respectful acknowledgement, not a submission. He can feel Tyrion watching from the side of the room, that careful political mind cataloging the angle of the bow and storing it for later consideration. Daenerys speaks first. She names herself in the traditional way, her titles, her birthright, her mission. And it is not performance so much as a statement of the terms on which she is willing to have this conversation. Jon listens to all of it, and then he speaks, and what he says is not a counterclaim. He does not list his own titles. He says that he has not sailed to Dragonstone to argue about who rules what. He says that he has come because something is moving beyond the wall, and it does not care about thrones, and that the living, all of them, every breathing creature on every side of every war being fought for a chair, are the same side now, whether they have chosen to be or not. She studies him. There's intelligence behind her eyes that her manner sometimes obscures. She has learned to project certainty the way commanders learn it, as an armor, and the armor is very good. But she is listening. He can feel her listening in the particular way that leaders who have survived real catastrophe learn to listen, not for what they want to hear, but for the shape of what is actually being said. He tells her about the army of the dead in the way he has told it a dozen times now, not as a story, and not as a warning exactly, but as a report, specific and sequential, because specificity is the only thing that makes the unbelievable inhabitable by the mind. The Hardhome dead rising, the eyes, the numbers, the cold. He has brought documentation, ravens from the Night's Watch, accounts from Eastwatch, records of the pattern of cold moving south over the past years, the kind of evidence that accumulates into something even the most resistant intelligence cannot dismiss entirely. Tyrion had asked for it before the meeting, and Jon had provided it, and he watches Daenerys now as she processes what she has already read alongside what she is hearing, cross-referencing them in real time with the careful precision of someone who has governed and fought and made decisions that cost lives. She does not want to believe it. He can see that clearly. But wanting something to be false has never been the same as it being false, and she knows that as well as anyone. The negotiation takes hours. It is not a single conversation, but a series of them. Formal exchanges in the throne room, then more direct discussions in a smaller chamber where maps are spread across a stone table, and Tyrion speaks, and Jon speaks, and Daenerys asks precise questions about terrain and timing and scale. She is not hostile. She is rigorous. He respects that more than he would have respected easy agreement. She argues every point that can be argued and accepts only what the evidence actually supports. And by the time the light through the high windows has shifted from afternoon to something darker, she has committed. Her armies, her dragons, the full weight of what she has assembled, all of it moving north, not in a desperate reactive surge, but in organized preparation, structured and timed, moving with the kind of deliberate force that can actually hold a line rather than simply reach one. That evening, after the formal discussions have closed and the others have moved to the great hall for the meal, Jon finds himself standing at the edge of one of the castle's upper walkways, looking out at the sea going dark in the distance. He hears her step behind him before she speaks. Daenerys stands beside him, and they look at the water together for a moment without either of them saying anything. And the silence is not uncomfortable. It is the silence of two people who have both been carrying very heavy things for a very long time. He tells her then, quietly, with the sea below them and no one else present, that there is something about his birth she will eventually need to know. He does not elaborate. He gives her the fact of the statement and nothing more, because more would require the kind of careful conversation that belongs to a time when the dead are not marching and the world is not balanced on an edge. She turns to look at him. It is a long look, unhurried, and he meets it steadily. Whatever she finds in his face, she holds it there for a moment, and then she says that they will speak of it after the war. Her voice is even. Her eyes are not exactly unreadable, but what is in them is complex enough that he does not try to name it, and she does not ask him to. That is enough. He nods once, and she looks back at the sea. Below, in the harbor, the first ships are already being provisioned for the journey north. The ships reach White Harbor before the first true freeze locks the northern harbors, and from there, the armies move inland along roads that creak and groan beneath the weight of men and horses, and the particular cold that settles over the north, like something older than memory. The dragons fly ahead, and those who see them for the first time, villagers at the edges of fields, shepherds on the hillsides, children pressed to the narrow windows of stone cottages, do not run. They watch. Something in the sight of enormous wings against a gray northern sky registers not as threat, but as event, as the feeling that a page is being turned. The world is changing. Even those who cannot read know that. The Night King does not wait for them to come to him. That is what the ravens report, one after another, through the long cold march northward. He is moving south. He has always been moving south. And so what comes is not a siege, but a meeting, a collision of two armies in the frozen fields north of Winterfell, where the ground is hard as iron, and the wind moves through the gaps in armor as though it has a purpose. Robb commands the eastern flank, and Jon the western, and between them, they have studied this ground since childhood. Every hollow and ridge, every place where the earth dips and the footing becomes treacherous. That knowledge matters. It matters enormously. The battle is not a single moment. That is the thing no song will ever quite capture, though the songs will try. It is hours of cold and noise, and the terrible mechanical patience required to hold a line when the dead keep rising and reforming. When every man lost to your side becomes a problem added to theirs. When the mathematics of the engagement keep shifting in directions the mind does not want to follow. Daenerys flies above it with the calculating clarity of someone who has spent years learning to make the terrible decision that saves the most lives, and the dragonfire cuts through the army of the dead in great swaths, and still there are more. There are always more. Jon finds the Night King at the center of it. The logic is almost clean. The way the dead part around their king. The way the cold deepens near him specifically. the way the air itself seems to crystallize. Jon moves toward that cold with a Valyrian steel blade and the absolute stillness of someone who has already decided the outcome and is simply walking toward it. The Night King turns to face him. He has always known this moment was coming. Jon has too. The blade finds its mark, and the silence that follows is immediate and enormous. The way a bell's echo fills a room and then withdraws, and then the dead begin to fall, all of them simultaneously, like a curtain dropping, like a long argument finally exhausted of breath. The sun comes up over the field the next morning and finds the living standing among the still. They are diminished. The cost has been real and particular. Names that will be spoken for generations in the halls of houses across the north, carved into stone, stitched into banners. But the dead stay dead. The world holds. Jon speaks to the assembled lords in the great hall at Winterfell, and it is a different kind of quiet that falls over the room when he is finished. He gives them the truth plainly, the way a man hands over a sword, hilt first, to someone he trusts. His father was Rhaegar Targaryen, his mother Lyanna Stark, and there is dragon blood in him as surely as there is northern stone. The room absorbs it slowly, the way cold earth absorbs rain. Then Jon says, with the same steadiness with which he has said everything that matters in his life, that he wants no throne. He says it without qualification, without the performance of reluctance that would make it seem calculated. He means it in the way a man means it, when the wanting has never been there to begin with. He looks at Robb when he says it, and Robb holds his gaze, and between them passes something that requires no words at all. The understanding of men who have grown into themselves in the same yard, beneath the same sky, sharpened against each other for years. Robb is his king. He has always been his king. That is not a concession. It is simply true. Daenerys accepts this with the grace of someone who has learned, through great suffering, the difference between power taken and power offered. The alliance holds. The world reorganizes itself in the months that follow. Not a single throne, but a council, lords and representatives, the unwieldy and imperfect machinery of shared governance beginning its slow turning. Winterfell is rebuilt, stone by stone, timber by timber. The castle fills again with warmth and noise and the particular chaos of a household that is genuinely alive. Catelyn sits beside Robb in the great hall where she sat beside his father, and there is something in her posture now that has settled into itself. A woman fully inhabiting the space she occupies. She earned the seat twice over. She earned it the night she refused to send a child away. Jon is in the yard in the mornings with the small ones. He is patient in the way only those who have been found can be patient, unhurried, attentive, without the particular hunger of someone who is still searching. A small girl in a too large cloak swings a wooden sword at the air and misses, and he adjusts her grip without speaking, and she tries again, and the yard is full of the sound of that. The ordinary bright noise of children learning to become capable, and above them, the sky is the exact gray blue of early winter, and the home that was almost taken from him at 14 holds him now as it always should have, settled and certain, belonging to him as completely as he belongs to it.